Hello everybody, welcome back to Mason Zero MTG. My name is Mason, and today we're going to continue going through my new and improved cube. If you missed the first episode where I went through the white cards, go ahead and watch that video. Should be the previous video on my channel before this one. Essentially what I did, to do a quick run through, my cube was 540 cards. It had a lot of themes going on, some tribal, some random themes, and my goal was to bring it down to 360 cards and then focus more on archetypes rather than themes to make it more strong in general. And I think I accomplished that for the most part. So while you're watching this video, please comment below if you agree or disagree with any of the choices that I've made and any cards that I should add into the cube, in blue in this case, because I'm always looking to improve it, and I think this is good right now, but I think that it's still going to grow from here. So without further ado, let's start with Siren Stormtamer. It's 1 mana for a 1/1 flyer. You can pay a blue and sacrifice it to counter a spell or ability that targets you or a creature you control. I think that there's a lot going on in this card for just 1 mana. The ability to leave up a blue to counter most removal spells or discard spells or anything like that, I think is fantastic. I think this card does a lot of work. Delver of Secrets, of course, an essential in any blue-based spells deck. A 1 mana 1/1. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may reveal that card. If an instant or sorcery is revealed, transform Delver of Secrets, and he turns into a 3/2 flyer on the other side. So, great card for beaten down in a spells deck. Phantasmal Image, 2 mana for a 0/0 illusion. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield except it's an illusion in addition to its other types, and gains when this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, sacrifice it. I initially had this card in my cube for the tribal element. I kept it in because it's just a good card. It becoming a copy of the best creature on the battlefield is great. Obviously, there is that downside, but for only 2 mana, you can potentially be making, a 6/6 or something. Like, it's great. Thing in the Ice is another pet card that I have that I really love, and I think it's great in the spells deck. It's 2 mana for a 0/4 defender. It enters the battlefield with 4 ice counters on it, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you remove an ice counter from it. Then, if it has no more counters on it, you transform it. And it turns into Awoken Horror, which is a 7/8, and when it transforms into Awoken Horror, return all non-horror creatures to their owner's hands. I love this card because it's an early game play. You can play it on turn 2, it stems some bleeding for a few turns, then you cast a couple spells, and it turns into a game finisher. It bounces everything, and in just 2 or 3 turns, you will have won the game probably. So, I love this card. I think it's great for any spells deck. Cryptoplasm, 3 mana for a 2/2 shapeshifter. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may have Cryptoplasm become a copy of another target creature. If you do, Cryptoplasm gains this ability. I think blue's ability to shapeshift and turn into other things is fantastic. I really like this card a lot. Much like the Phantasmal Image, you can have it become a copy of the strongest creature on the battlefield. In this case, you don't get any enter the battlefield triggers, but you can activate abilities, you can go to combat. It's a very versatile card. It can become many things. Master of Ethereum, a 3 mana artifact creature. Its power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts you control. Other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. I think I did reduce the amount of artifacts that I had in the deck in general, but I still think this card is very good. I have a few cards that make Thopters and things like that, so those Thopters are going to be really big. I think this card is still excellent in the deck. I think it's very viable to build an artifacts deck if you're drafting it. Simic Manipulator. This is one that I still want to change, but I want to experiment with it a bit. 3 mana 0/1 with Evolve. You can tap and remove 1 or more +1/+1 counters from it and gain control of target creature with power less than or equal to the number of +1/+1 counters removed this way. Most likely it's going to be just a one-time thing, but its ability to regrow those counters is kind of cool. So, maybe not a good one since I took away any counter synergies, but I want to experiment with it, at least for now. I don't necessarily have anything better to put in at the moment. Mana War, 3 mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, return target creature to its owner's hand. Definitely an essential effect in any cube. Whirler Rogue, 4 mana for a 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, put 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. Tap 2 untapped artifacts you control. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. You get 4 power for 4 mana, 2 of that flying, and like I said with the Master of Ethereum, they become 2/2s each, which is great. So the artifact deck, I think, is still very viable. Aven Fleetwing, 4 mana for a 2/2 flying hexproof. This is mostly here for the hexproof. I think that blue needs some creatures that can protect themselves. I struggled to find a good, cheap blue card that had hexproof, and I think that this guy does the job. He's also a flyer, which means that he is evasive. Niblis of Frost, 4 mana for a 3/3 flying prowess. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, tap target creature and opponent controls. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. I find that many cubes, blue is almost entirely spells, mostly counter spells and draw spells. I tried to have a few more creatures than average while focusing on creatures that interacted with spells, such as the Niblis of Frost. Dungeon Geists, 4 mana for a 3/3 flying. When Dungeon Geist enters the battlefield, tap target creature and opponent controls. That creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step for as long as you control Dungeon Geists. Again, just a value blue control card, and it beats pretty well in the air. Fairy Artisans, 4 mana 2/2 flying. Whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except as an artifact in addition to its other types. Then exile all other tokens created with Fairy Artisans. This is a pretty interesting card, goes along with blue's shape-shifting and copying abilities. Also some subtle artifact synergies by the fact that it makes artifact tokens. I think that this is another great way to take the powerful things your opponent is doing. It is unfortunate that you can't choose to just keep it. Whenever they play something, you have to copy it. But I still think it's a very nice effect, and you get all those enter the battlefield triggers. Mole Drifter, 4 and a blue for a 2/2 flying. When Mole Drifter comes into play, draw 2 cards. Evoke for 3. Mole Drifter is just one of those value cards. It should be in every cube with blue. If you evoke it, it's just divination, which is fine. Otherwise, pay 2 more mana and you get a 2/2 flying body on top of it. So, like most evoke cards, it sort of scales with the game. You can play it on turn 3 to draw 2, play it on turn 5 to also have a body. And I got this nice foil of it from an actual Lorwyn pack, which I was super excited about when doing a Chaos draft recently. Peregrine Drake, 5 mana for a 2/3 flying. When Peregrine Drake enters the battlefield, untap up to 5 lands. Good enough to be banned in Pauper. I think it's a great card. Again, those blue tempo plays, you can play something on turn 5, still have enough mana up for a counter spell and maybe a draw spell by untapping all your lands. I think that's a great ability. Definitely unfair. Mnemonic Wall, 5 mana for a 0/4 wall with Defender. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard to your hand. I really like Mnemonic Wall in spells decks. Recurring your best spell that you've played so far is always great. Having a wall is never a bad thing. It's a great blocker, so it's a good card to have. Arcane Savant, 5 mana for a 3/3. Before you shuffle your deck to start the game, you may reveal this card from your deck and exile an instant or sorcery card you drafted that isn't in your deck. When Arcane Savant enters the battlefield, copy a card you exiled with cards named Arcane Savant. You may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. I've tested all of these rare conspiracy creatures in the cube, and I think that this one is, by and large, the best one. During the last draft that I did, which is in the video on my channel. If you haven't seen that, go ahead and watch that. My friend Todd drafted this and chose Cruel Ultimatum as his card to cast off of this, and I think he won every game in which he was able to cast this on turn 5 and cast a turn 5 Cruel Ultimatum. So, very good card. I think this is going to stay around for a long time. Frost Titan, 6 mana for a 6/6. Whenever Frost Titan becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, counter that spell or ability unless its controller pays 2. Whenever Frost Titan enters the battlefield or attacks, tap target permanent. It doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. My goal is to get all of the Titans into the cube. I think the Titans are all great. They're all amazing value for their mana cost, and they can help you finish up games. I think the blue one is probably one of the weaker ones, but I think it's still pretty great. Kaiga the Tidestar, 6 mana for a 5/5 flying. When Kaiga the Tidestar dies, gain control of target creature. I think of all the spirit dragons, I think that this one's probably one of my favorite ones. I think it's a great blue effect, and it's a big, expensive blue flyer, and it does something when it dies, something that might swing the game in your favor. It's kind of like having protection from your opponent's removal, because they know that they have to time it well or you're going to get potentially a good creature. Then we have Magus of the Mind, 6 mana for a 4/5. Pay a blue, tap, and sacrifice it. Shuffle your library, then exile the top X cards, where X is 1 plus the number of spells cast this turn. Until end of turn, you may play cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. I like this more than the spell that it's named after, because once you get this on the battlefield, obviously it's vulnerable, but you only have to pay 1 mana on the turn that you want to go off with Storm, whereas the original spell, I think, is 6 mana. So yeah, this is I just prefer this version. It is more susceptible to getting removed in the meantime, but I think when you go off, you can go off more because you'll have 5 more mana at your disposal. So that's all of our creatures. Now we're into our 2 planeswalkers. We start off with Jace, Cunning Castaway, 3 mana for 3 loyalty. +1, whenever 1 or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player this turn, draw a card, then discard a card. -2, create a 2/2 blue illusion creature token with when this creature becomes the target of a spell, sacrifice it. And -5, create 2 tokens that are copies of Jace, Cunning Castaway, except they're not legendary. I think that the first ability is good, mostly because there's a lot of flyers in blue. They have a lot of evasion. I think this planeswalker is just okay. It's nice that it's really cheap. I think getting to the ultimate isn't very difficult. So someday, maybe, I would like to replace this one with something more powerful, but this is the most in-budget option right now. Jace the Living Guild Pact, 4 mana for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. +1, look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them into your graveyard. -3, return another target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. -8, each player shuffles his or her hand and graveyard into his or her library. You draw 7 cards. I think that this planeswalker is just decent value all around. The top ability helps fuel graveyard decks, which are in black, green, and blue. And, it has some control in its minus, and its ultimate is pretty good. Obviously, I mean, you get significant card advantage. So I think it is an okay card. Now we are into our instants, which there are probably quite a few of. Our first one is Condescend, X in blue, counter target spell unless its controller pays X, scry 2. Just a nice counter spell, scales with the game, of course. Read the runes, X in blue, draw X cards. For each card drawn this way, discard a card unless you sacrifice a permanent. This one seems interesting. I'm not sure if I want to replace it with the one from Amonkhet, Pull from Tomorrow. I'm not sure which one I like best. This one could have some interesting corner cases, but it's just a draw spell that scales. Brainstorm, 1 mana, draw 3 cards, then put any 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Just an efficient draw and filtering spell for only 1 mana. All these 1 mana, 2 mana spells can help storm off and stuff like that if you're using Magus of the Mind. Censor, 2 mana, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1, cycling for 1 blue. I think card rate because in Cube, being a singleton format, you never know when you're going to draw your cards, and this is not something that you want to draw late in the game, so having cycling is a fantastic, way out, because you're never going to play something like this on turn 10, most likely. Disdainful Stroke, 2 mana, counter target spell with converted mana cost 4 or greater. There are plenty of expensive spells in the cube that you would want to counter with this, so I think it is a fine card. Anticipate, 2 mana, look at the top 3 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. This is simultaneously a good card and a pet card for me. Anticipate is a card that I've always really enjoyed ever since I first started playing Magic in Dragons of Tarkir. So I have a special place in my heart for this card, and I love playing it. I think it's a great filtering spell. Speaking of which, we have Impulse, which is marginally better. Look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom in any order. So you get to dig 1 card deeper with this. Combining them, I think, is great. You'll have a couple. Classic counter spell, 2 blue to counter target spell. An essential part of any cube. I think that this card should always be played in a blue deck. Just a catch-all counter spell. Whoop. And we have Mana Leak, 2 mana, counter target spell, unless its controller pays 3. Again, counter spells, good. Good to have a variety of them. We continue with Essence Scatter, 2 mana, counter target creature spell. Memory Lapse, 2 mana, counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of into that player's graveyard. So I think I've buffed up the amount of counter spells just because there weren't a lot in the previous iteration of the cube. I probably should have had more, so I increased the density a bit. I think the main thing I did with blue is increase the number of spells and decrease the number of creatures. I think that ratio was a bit off. Next up is Perilous Voyage. 2 mana, return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. If its converted mana cost was 2 or less, scry 2. I really like this card, mostly because it gives you some extra value for returning a low-cost card. Sometimes that's all you want to do, or you want to play this early. So I think that's a nice little bonus being able to scry. Cyclonic Rift. 2 mana, return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand, and Overload for 7. Great commander staple. I think it's a good cube staple as well. It can kind of do a pseudo board wipe, but one-sided, which I think is great. Forbidden Alchemy. 3 mana, look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of them into your hand, and the rest into your graveyard. Flashback for 7. So another great card filtering, and it has flashback, it has graveyard synergy. It's everything that you want if you're doing a graveyard deck. Rewind. 4 mana, counter target spell, untap up to 4 lands. If you can't tell, I really enjoy these spells that are free, quote unquote, where you get to untap your lands at the end. I think that's an extremely powerful effect, but you have to plan a bit in advance. So it's powerful, but balanced, I feel, in the right scenario. Insidious Will, 4 mana, choose 1, counter target spell. You may choose new targets for target spell, or copy target instant or sorcery spell. You may choose new targets for the copy. As you may know by now, I love modal spells. I think this one is a great assortment of things that you will be wanting to do in a spells deck. Countering something is always great, although it's a bit expensive for that. But redirecting something or copying it can be huge in a spells deck. I love this one. Speaking of spells I love, we have Spell Swindle. 5 mana, counter target spell, create X colorless treasure artifact tokens, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. And of course, treasures have tap, sacrifices artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. While a very expensive counter spell, I really enjoy this one. I think casting it on something big is the dream. It's basically mana drain, but you have to pay more up front. But then you can use the mana at any time. So big fan of that card. Dig Through Time, I believe, is a new addition. 8 mana with Delve. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put 2 of them into your hand and the rest on the bottom in any order. I have always enjoyed this card. I think it is great. I did not have it in my cube before, but I'm excited to have it now. On to our sorceries. Our first one is Serum Visions. 1 mana, draw a card, scry 2. Essential in Modern, a great little cantrip. Very useful in a spells deck. Helps dig through. Chart a Course. 2 mana, draw 2 cards, then discard a card unless you attacked with a creature this turn. You can sort of tailor your turn for whichever you want. If maybe you do want to discard a card, you can do it before you attack. You can do it after you attack for the most value. I think being aggressive in blue is kind of an interesting thing that you can do, so I would definitely encourage that with this card. Deep Analysis. 4 mana, target player draws 2 cards, flashback for 2 mana, and pay 3 life. I've wanted this card in the cube for a while. I think that repeatable card draw is great. You know, at the end of the game, you might not care about your life total as much, and being able to have more mana available to play those 2 cards by paying just 2 mana instead of 4, I think is really cool. So big fan of that one. Tezzeret's Gambit. 3 and a Phyrexian blue mana, draw 2 cards, then proliferate. Obviously drawing 2 cards is good. And then proliferating is great if you're doing sort of a planeswalker control deck. There's a few other counters, a couple +1/+1 counters and things like that. We'll see if this card sticks around, but I think that with all the planeswalkers and things like that, proliferate can be very strong. Baral's Expertise. 5 mana, return up to 3 target artifacts and or creatures to their owner's hands. You may cast a card with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. I love all of the expertises because of your ability to cast a spell for free. I think Baral's Expertise fits in a nice little niche at 5 mana. I think that a lot of the spells you want to be casting for free are probably 4 or less. That's a good place to be. And returning a lot of things to their owner's hands, I think is great. It's nice that it hits artifacts and creatures. So that's in the cube for plenty of reasons. Part the Water Veil is our extra turn card. 6 mana, take an extra turn after this one. Exile Part the Water Veil. And Awaken 6 if you have 9 mana sitting around. So one of those late game inevitability things. If you make it to 9 mana, you can have a threat on the board during that extra turn. Treasure Cruise. 8 mana with Delve, draw 3 cards. Obviously, very good card, especially with Dig Through Time. Those are 2 great cards to have for a graveyard deck. Claustrophobia. 3 mana for an aura, enchant creature. When it enters the battlefield, tap enchanted creature. Enchanted creature doesn't untap during its controller's untap step. This is just a good, solid control card to have around. I like it. It keeps a creature tapped. They have to spend a hard-to-find spell potentially to remove the enchantment. So it's in for now. And last, but no, we got 2 more. Control Magic. It's our next one. 4 mana. Enchant creature. You control enchanted creature. That's a solid blue effect, stealing your opponent's stuff. As you can see, that's sort of a trend in blue, is taking your opponent's cards. And this is the original, the classic. And we even have, I believe, the revised edition of it. So, very cool. Our last one is Thopter Spy Network. 4 mana for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control an artifact, put a 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Whenever 1 or more artifact creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, draw a card. So one of those value enchantments. Every turn you will probably be getting a Thopter and drawing a card. It's a little expensive, but I like this enchantment for a sort of control deck that is utilizing artifacts, and I think it's essential in a deck like that. So that is all of the blue cards. I hope that you very much enjoyed this video and our trip through blue. Let me know if you have any suggestions. I think my blue is strong, but there are a lot of cards I'm missing purely due to budget constraints. looking at other popular cubes online, there's a lot of very powerful blue cards that I, currently can't afford. There's some cheaper ones that I'm looking to increase the power level, Tinker being one of them, to make that artifacts theme a little stronger. There's a few other ones I have my eyes set on, spells and stuff like that. But I think I've improved it a lot since the previous iteration, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it. So let me know what cards you like, what cards you don't like, and what cards you think would go well in the blue section of the cube. Tomorrow will be the black cards, and in the meantime, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.